Are you new to, or do you still need help with Kendra's Card Challenge 21? Today I'm going to walk you through the PDF and cutting guide one more time, and we will also assemble a couple more of the sketches. Hey, it's Beth. Welcome. Today I am going to walk you through one more time Kendra's Card Challenge 21. As I'm filming this, it's towards the end of February of 2026, so that's the second month of the first quarter of 2026. So that means we have just over one more month left of Kendra's Card Challenge 21. So I have one more video where I'm going to explain the printable and how to do the cutting, and then I should have one more assembly video coming up here within the next few weeks as well, just for some further inspiration on using the card challenge. But if you are new to Kendra's Card Challenges, each quarter, Cards by Kendra puts together a printable, like a downloadable or printable PDF that helps you take six 6x6 sheets of pattern paper and turn them into 15 cards. So to get the printable, you can go to kendrascardchallenges.com. You do have to sign up for a free account, but that should allow you to download this printable for free. Like, just to download the printable, it costs you nothing. It is through her Patreon site, so there will be additional memberships that you could join, like membership levels that you could pay for to join if you wanted additional benefits that we'll talk about a little bit further in the PDF. But just to download the printable, it is absolutely free. So once you have downloaded the PDF workbook, this very first page has some QR codes on it. There's one that you can scan it and will take you to her Facebook page, her group page, where people share inspiration or questions if they have them. And then there's an opportunity kind of for prizes through there as well. We'll touch on that again here in a second. Then there's 3 codes here that you can scan. These go to her InLinkz party pages. So again, we'll talk more about them in the prizes, but each month you have an opportunity to win a prize by submitting a photo of all 15 cards together, and that's where you would use these codes. There's one code for each month in the quarter. So right now we are towards the end of February, so you would use this code for the rest of February, and then in March you would use this code, and it only takes you to the active month, so you don't have to worry about what month your photo is going to, it's not going to end up in the wrong month. And then there's also a supply list here that tells you what you need, just some general copyright information. Then we get into the cutting guide. So these are for the 6x6 sheets of pattern paper. They are labeled A through F, and that corresponds, to 6 sheets. She gives you, all of the dimensions, like the sizes, kind of places to start, everything that you need to help you get those 6 sheets cut down with the appropriate pieces that will then help you work through the card sketches, which is the next section. So once you get to the card sketches, there's some instructions, which I do encourage you to read if this is the first time you are using the challenge. There's also some information about entering for chances to win prizes. So we touched on the codes here, and like I said, you can scan these, and that will take you to an InLinkz party page for the month, and you would need to submit a photo that has all of 15 cards from this challenge in it together. And the cards have to be similar enough to the original sketches that she can look at them and know which sketch the card would go with. And then there's some additional opportunities if you upload photos of individual cards to the Facebook group, which again, that QR code is right here that you can scan. And that will also help you have the opportunity to be part of the monthly showcase the showcase videos that she does for the prize drawings and such. And also the Facebook group is also a great place to just get some inspiration and ask questions. And then if you happen to share your cards anywhere, she's got some hashtags here that you can use, and then some additional tips. So then comes the 15 card sketches. So they are numbered 1 through 15. And then each sketch has individual measurements on them, so that if you don't want to do all 15 at one time, maybe you don't have time, maybe you just really like one sketch and you want to do that one, you can make one card at a time. She does give you the measurements so that you can do that. When you are looking at the card sketches, I have mine printed in black and white just to save color ink. And the card sketch has a kind of a, they make A2 size cards. So she gives you the card size is like that first dark gray layer. The white layer is a matte and it is your choosing. So if it's white or black or a darker gray, then that means it's something that she doesn't give you a cutting guide for. It's something that you can choose what to use, or you can do without it. But another way to know that is it does not have a letter associated with it. So you can see here on this card sketch 1, this half circle says paper A. So this is what you cut down with the cutting guide A. And then there's a strip here that came from cutting guide E. But then those are the only 2 letters on this sketch. So the rest of it could be cardstock. It could be, you could emboss some cardstock. You could bring in some additional pattern paper. You can bring in your own embellishments, your own sentiments. So there are a lot of opportunities to make these sketches your own. These are kind of like a jumping off point. But like I did mention before, if you're wanting to enter into the prize drawing, they have to look similar enough once you've done your thing to the original sketch that people can know which sketch that they belong to. So in addition to the 6x6 papers, the 6x6 sheets of paper that you need, you will need some cardstock for matting, layers, and then you'll need some sentiment and then some embellishments, and then obviously your A2 card bases. But each sketch, it's kind of laid out in the same way as far as, you know, what the colors mean and what the letters mean or lack of letters. When she gives you shapes, you know, there's some, if they weren't part of the cutting guide, there's there's room to kind of do what you want. Like if you don't have a 3-inch die or punch or something, you could do smaller, or you could make it a square. Sometimes she will even say any shape, such as this one. So there is, like, you know, some room to be creative or to make it your own based on your needs. But then it goes through all 15 sketches. And then on this last page, if you like to coordinate your papers based on which ones are going together on like which card sketch, there is a chart back here that tells you that. So you can see here that for sketch 1, it uses papers A and E. So if, you know, maybe you wanted to coordinate those specifically, then you could look at the cutting guides and then the sketches and figure out which 2 pattern papers you would like to use for A and E, and then so on for all 15 sketches. There's a list here for prize sponsors. So the prizes that I talked about earlier, those come from our wonderful sponsors, and they donate prizes to Kendra, who then passes them on to you all for submitting your photos and playing along with the challenge. There are, like I said, additional Patreon levels that you can pay to join for some amazing benefits. So there's a chart here that kind of breaks down those benefits. And, you know, the tiers start at $2. And it's just a great way to support her for all of the hard work she does. And, you know, you do get some great benefits from that as well, just from the $2 one, like getting a printer-friendly version of this and being eligible for patron-only like updates and information and inspiration and things like that. But when you join her Patreon site as a free member, you can still do a lot of things. There are a lot of opportunities to be involved on that page. There's a lot of inspiration on that page. You can ask questions. So it, just like the Facebook group, it is a great place to get your questions answered and get some inspiration on using the challenge. So that is the PDF kind of in a nutshell. And so now we're going to walk through how I choose and cut down the 6 sheets of pattern paper. For my cards today, I am using the Wishing You Happiness pad from the Stamps of Life. And I do have my papers already chosen, but I wanted to talk about why I chose the ones I did. If you look at sketch A here, it has a lot of smaller pieces that get cut, and so it wouldn't work well with a larger print, because if you look at that print on that back side, you wouldn't be able to see much of the critters that were on there. And then B is very similar, and so I chose kind of a pattern that it didn't really matter. I could have used the back side of that as well, but I wanted to mix up my patterns a little bit. Now we get into cutting guide C, and it has some bigger pieces, so I can get away with using a bigger pattern. You know, with those animals, you'll be able to see what those animals are. D is kind of back to some smaller pieces, so I went with the diagonal stripes. E and F are both larger pieces, but I decided to bring in that polka dot for one, and then I'm going to use the large turtle print for F. So kind of a good mix of smaller and larger prints, but it's good to pay attention to what kind of pieces you're going to be cutting with each sheet or with each cutting guide to figure out maybe what patterns you want to use with them. One thing about the Stamps of Life pads is they are actually 6.5 inches tall by 6 inches wide, so I'm going to have an extra ½ inch to trim off when I'm doing the cutting guides. So starting with cutting guide A, I started with the line where the scissors were and cut all the way across, and now I'm going to be working on the top section and cutting the strips according to the cutting guide. I always like to, Kendra gives you the scissor line that shows you where the best place to start is, and it's usually a place that cuts all the way through the sheet. So I start there, and then we'll look for kind of like the next best place to cut all the way through and work in sections. So I worked on the top half, and now I'm going to come into the bottom half, starting on the right hand side, cutting off that little strip. And then I have like that extra little half piece left over from because remember my pad is 6.5 inches tall. And now we'll be working on the square pieces that get cut into circles, and then trimming down like that strip that's on top of the 2.5 inch circle. So at this point, the cutting guide does call for some circles to be cut. And so I have a couple of circle dies here. I wanted to show you that the cutting guide shows a 3-inch circle, but depending on how close your cut is, you may not be able to fit a full 3-inch circle, so just go to the next, like the largest size that you can fit on those squares. And then the same way with the smaller one, the 2.5 inch circle die kind of overlapped a little bit, so I had to come down in size just a little bit. And for these, if you don't have circle dies, you could use punches, you could trace shapes and hand cut them out, or if you don't have any way to cut a circle or punch a circle, then you can totally just leave them as squares or create a different shape. You have to choose whatever works best for you. The sketches and guides are jumping off points, not, hard, fast rules. So then I'm going to harvest these extra ½ inches off of these pieces just so I can use later on the inside of my cards. And then the cutting guide shows the circles being cut in half. So because I have this plaid pattern, I'm trying to line it up so that I'm cutting along one of the lines in the pattern so that it looks a little cleaner and not quite like so cockeyed whenever they're cut in half, if that makes sense, so that the plaid pattern isn't crooked, is what I'm trying to say. So now I have all my pieces cut, and I have put them over there on the right hand side in the exact same order that they are on the cutting guide. I have a bag of bags, and each bag has a number on it that corresponds to a sketch number. So from cutting guide A, I went through and pulled all the pieces for sketch 1 and put those in the number 1 baggie. I did the same. I pulled the pieces that say sketch 2, and then there's a piece for sketch 3, and I'm going to move on to sketch 4, and then it jumps up to sketch 7. I'm going to pull those 2 little pieces, and then sketch 12 I think is this next one, yeah. And this just helps keep everything organized. The biggest tip I can give you for the challenge is to stay organized, keep all of the pieces for each sketch together. It just really helps make the process go a little smoother. So for cutting guide B, I started where the scissors was and cut all the way through, and then I'm going to work on that top section above where the scissor line is and cut those strips down. And then once these strips are cut, I am going to move on to the middle section there and cut the large strip and then cut it down into the vertical pieces that the cutting guide calls for. And again, just laying everything in the same order over there on the right hand side. You could also label the pieces if you don't want to do it this way. Just whatever method works for you to make sure to keep track of which pieces go with which sketches. So now I have moved to the bottom section. Move these all up so that they can fit in screen. And then the very last bit of strips there at the bottom. If the cutting guides do give you arrows on each of the pieces to show how those pieces will be oriented on the sketch, and then it gives you the sketch number on each piece as well. The arrows tell you again how it will be oriented on the actual sketch. So if you're using directional paper, this can help you. Probably the easiest is to use non-directional paper or double-sided paper, because there's been, I think every time, you know, I use at least one directional piece and then we'll end up having to flip to the back side just because of how it gets oriented on a card. So I'm not always the best at paying attention to the arrows when I'm choosing my papers, so that is something to think about too. That's something I need to get better at. I usually try to use non-directional pieces, but if I don't, then at least I try to use double-sided paper, so I have a backside option that is usually non-directional. So I finished putting all of the pieces from cutting guide B into my baggies, and I'm moving on to C, starting again where the scissor cut mark is, and then we'll cut that bottom section down there. I do have 2 other videos that show the cutting guide for Kendra's Card Challenge 21, so I will link those in the description box below for you as well if you want kind of more time spent with the cutting guides. So I'm going to do those big parts for cutting guide C, and I needed to cut the extra half inch off of my paper first. And now I'm working kind of on that right hand side, those 2 pieces, and then can put all of cutting guide C in the baggies. In the other videos, I'm sure, like throughout all of the videos that I've done for the cutting guides, I kind of focus on different things, you know, that I'm talking about different things each time, or focusing more on one than another. So if you need help, hopefully between those 3 cutting guides videos, that it's kind of like full coverage for you, if that makes sense. So again, for D, started with the scissor mark, and then I'm going to work on the larger section on the right, just because the sections to the left are going to be circles, and I want to leave a larger piece because I'm going to be punching my circles this time, and so I wanted to leave a larger piece that I could have paper to hold on to while I'm punching. So again, that was just that extra ½ inch that I cut off and kind of tossed to the side to save for later. And I'm kind of working my way up on that section on the right. Now I'm going to come over to the left-hand side, and I have punches that work for all of these sizes. So I have a 2 1/4 inch punch, and then a 2-inch circle punch, but I wanted to cut that long strip off, like that ½ inch strip from the left first, so I didn't want to like punch into that, so I needed to get that trimmed off first, and then I can bring in my 2-inch circle punch. And then from the piece that's left, I am working on punching the 1 1/4 inch circle and trying to stay as far to the right as I can so that I can cut off another ½ inch strip from the left hand side. So doing this one kind of backwards than probably what most people do, but with those circles I found, since this is the 3rd time that I'm like doing the full challenge, I have found that it's easier to have more paper to hold on to when I'm punching. If you're die cutting, it doesn't matter. But since I did have punches that worked for those sizes, I wanted to go ahead and use the punches. So now I'm just going to put all the pieces in the appropriate bags again. As far as the bag system, you can use bags. I am using like recycled bags that I've used for other projects. So you'll see a mix of bags that I've used. You can use the cello bags that you would use for A2 cards. You can use Ziploc baggies. You can use envelopes, whatever works for you. It does not have to be fancy, just needs to keep you organized. For cutting guide E, I'm starting down there with the scissor mark and cutting across that little like bottom little strip, and then we'll finish cutting all of those pieces. And then I'm going to look for another good spot to cut all the way through, which is the vertical pieces. So I'm going to I cut my extra ½ inch off first, and then I'm going to come in and cut the 2 thinner vertical pieces, and then like that large piece. And we'll get these put in the appropriate baggies. One reason I like to do, you could also have like if you have the space, you could do piles on your desk somewhere for each of the pieces as well. I don't have that space on my work desk, and I tend to do these sometimes in chunks, so it's just easier for me to use the baggie to keep them all secure. Last cutting guide F, I'm going to cut where the scissor mark is, that little strip there at the bottom, and then can work on the bigger pieces at top. I'm going to cut my extra ½ inch off this time, and then cut the strips from the top section, and then the cutting is done. So my normal process is I do all of the cutting for the pattern paper. I follow the cutting guides, and then my next step is to go back and work through each sketch to pull in the matting layers that I might need and any embellishments or sentiments. So that is what we're going to be working on next. I'm going to highlight sketches 1 and 10 today. So for sketch 1, I am going to pull my baggie back out with all of the pieces, and then I'm going to look for cardstock that works with the pieces that I've got for sketch 1. So I've pulled out 3 colors of cardstock from my stash that worked with the pad as a whole, and then I'm going to look at the ones that, find one that works best for these particular patterns that I'm using. So on the sketch, there is the large white piece there, and it does not have a letter associated with it, so it did not come from a cutting guide. It is meant to be your choice. So it is a matting piece, and it can be pattern paper, additional pattern paper. You can use cardstock of some kind. It is just your choice, whatever you want to use to mat. And the same goes with the other half of the circle. So we took the circle on cutting guide A and cut it in half. We're using half on this sketch and half on another sketch, so I need another half of my circle, and I'm just using white. And so that is represented by like a darker gray this time. So white spaces or darker gray spaces tend to be free choices. You'll know that also because they will not have a letter associated with them that tells you it came from a certain cutting guide. So I know that tends to confuse people, so hopefully, you know, that helps explain that a little bit. And as far as how I choose the pieces that I mat with, sometimes I go with pattern paper, sometimes I use cardstock, sometimes I will emboss that cardstock, sometimes I leave it. It just depends on what's going on with the rest of the card. This time I did emboss my cardstock because there wasn't a whole lot else going onto the card. In the pad, there were several pages of these shapes that I could fussy cut, and so I was just choosing which shape I wanted to use. And then for my sentiment, I have a happy birthday sentiment from the Ultimate Sentiments birthday from the Not Too Shabby shop, and it does have a coordinating die set. It's the Ultimate Sentiment, or the Shabby Snips coordinating dies. So I do use that quite a bit just because it works really well for some of those sentiment strips that sketch is called for. So I do go ahead and stamp it a few times knowing that I'm going to be using it throughout. So here's the coordinating die set, and it has pieces that will cut the sentiment, and then also there's a larger strip at the top there that will cut a matting layer if I want to use it. So I took those over to my die cutting station and cut them all out. So I have the one sentiment I can use for this sketch, and then 2 extra sentiments that I can save and use for some future sketches. So I had used some tape to hold them all in place, so I'm just taking that off and deciding which one I want to use on this sketch, and then trying to decide if I want to add a matting layer, and I decide that I do. So I'm going to pull the Shabby Snips die over again and grab that matting layer piece, and it just fits on that diagonal stripe paper. I chose the diagonal stripes just because I didn't have a lot of pattern going on this sketch, so I decided that I could afford to have some pattern as a matting layer behind my sentiment. And then normally I would put that all back in the baggie and save it for when I come to assemble all of my cards. But I am going to go ahead and jump to the assembly of sketch 1 as well. I put my cardstock down on my A2 white card base, and then I'm going to add the pattern paper to the white circle that I cut, and I just made sure to choose the same size circle die for the white that I chose for the brown plaid. And I'm going to put my thin pattern strip across here and then just trim off the excess. You could also run it back through with your circle die if you wanted a cleaner look. This is just easier for me. And then we'll add, kind of layer up my sentiment piece here. And figure out where I want everything. So there was a shape on the circle there, she has a like leaf shape. You can choose any type of embellishment that you want. And I decided to go with this pig that I told you I'd fussy cut out, and it's a little bit larger. You can choose something that would fit just in the other half of your circle, or you can choose something larger that will overlap most of the circle like I am. Again, you choose what works best for you and your card. And this card was pretty simple to assemble. So next up, I'm going to move on to sketch 10. So I'm going to pull out my number 10 baggie. So this one has 4 little strips that kind of make a frame. So I want to alternate the patterns, and I'm going to back them on some white cardstock. So the piece behind the frame is, you could do 2 different things. She shows measurements for 3 1/4 inch square mat, and then a separate mat on the inside that's 2.5 inches. I'm going to keep it simple and just do one mat, like using that white cardstock, and I've just made it 3 1/4 inches square. I will build my frame on that. I was trying to decide what I wanted to use as my backing piece, and decided instead of the cardstock I would go with pattern, and so I did just add a double mat behind that 3 1/4 inch piece, and then we'll also use the green cardstock for the strip at the bottom. And then I need to figure out what I want to use for the sentiment, so I am going again to the Ultimate Sentiments birthday set, and we'll stamp some more of those so that I can die cut that out. It's like the perfect size. So I said this stamp just worked perfectly for a lot of the sentiment strips that the sketches called for in this challenge. So, and then I will use another bunny there. So again, I did this in pieces. I kind of put together all of my matting layers and embellishments, and then put it all back in the bag, and then we'll pull that out and assemble it. I have my PDF up there kind of in the top right, and was just turning to the next page for the card sketch so that I could assemble this one. So as I said earlier, I want to alternate the patterns. And I'm doing a dry fit before I glue anything down, just to make sure, kind of figure out my spacing for the outer frame. And then once I get the spacing where I want it, then I will kind of glue, obviously, one piece at a time, and kind of readjust the other pieces as I need to. But the pieces butt up against each other, so it just makes a basic square frame. I mean, if you wanted to, you could use washi tape to hold them all together, like tape them all together before you glue it down, and then glue it down in one piece. Now that my frame is done, I can add this layer to my green mat. We'll add my larger patterned mat to the card base. And again, this time I opted to go for a patterned paper mat instead of cardstock, just because I wanted to bring in a little more color. We'll add my sentiment layers down. And then as far as embellishing the center of that square, you could, create a scene in there, you could stamp, you could turn this into a shaker card. I was just keeping it simple and adding, you know, a little rabbit that I had fussy cut from the pad. And then sketch 10 is done. So hopefully this helped. If I left you with any more questions, let me know in the comments down below. Like I said, I'll link the other cutting guide videos for you as well. And then any other products that I had that you might be interested in, I'll link those. Thank you so very much for your time today, and hope you all have a very crafty day.